All right, welcome to episode 103 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, week two, an interesting spectacle of football here. What are your initial takeaways, man?
Look, my initial takeaways are Dr. Eager in two different NFL venues in the same week within 3 or 4 days? I mean, you were in Philly and you were in Mercedes-Benz at Atlanta. Two amazing games to watch, I thought. Well, one.
I know. I was so blessed. Thursday we had obviously Quasey is one of our friends, and and Zach Drapkin works for the Eagles, and then also because it was Thursday night, they do the analytics. They do the analytics broadcast. Our friend Sam Schwartzstein, who we've done work with before, we're all there. So we figured, if all of us are going to be gathered in one place, why not watch a football game? And then, my wife is a Green Bay fan. So when our anniversary came up in the summer, I was like, oh, why don't we get, because we were in like different parts. Like I was here and she was still back in the Midwest. And so I was like, hey, let's get tickets to Packers Falcons. I think unfortunately, well, for one, I do want to say this. When I walked into Mercedes-Benz Stadium, there was a very, very palpable Thomas Dimitroff vibe there. I've been to a lot of different stadiums. I've been obviously to all the stadiums that Minnesota has, Lambeau Field, historic, Arrowhead Stadium, a few other places. And I got to say, Atlanta had a completely different, in a good way, vibe to it. I was blown away. The fans were great, of course. I had no dog in the fight, so I was just watching football. So I was kind of observing things. And I thoroughly enjoyed that game. And I was like, there was a big part of me, and maybe I'm over indexing, but I'm like, dude, Thomas had some influence over this. So thank you for a good time yesterday.
Well, I'm glad it worked out well. I mean, I was driving back in that part of the game from Chapel Hill. I was with my wife, her daughter's up at UNC, and I was being the madman on the phone, right? Doing whatever I needed to do to check in and see what was going on. And that game was back and forth. I mean, kudos to Arthur Smith and the Falcons, the way that they came back. I didn't think they were going to have a chance to do it. I thought it was a gritty showing. I mean, again, the run game is doing their thing. Look, Desmond is going to be making his way, right, as he did. I saw the quotes from Arthur Smith after where he said, this team believes in Desmond Ridder. So, time will tell. They are believing in the running backs. Believe me, you get that cat the ball, and you pair him, of course, with Algiers. I'm talking about, when you get a double running back situation going, when you can drop the ball out to them, and that's pretty impressive. It's fun to watch for sure.
Adrian Peterson vibes I got from Bijan Robinson. I honestly, you go back about 15 years, and it did feel like those old Vikings teams. You had Adrian Peterson, Chester Taylor, really good in his own right, like Algier. And then you had a quarterback who everybody's like, God, if back then it was like Tavares Jackson. And you're like, oh my gosh, if you can just get a little bit more from that guy, this could be really good. And frankly, I thought Ridder played really poorly in the first half, and he made some throws in the second half, and he used his legs, I think, that in a very advantageous way, including the fourth down that cut it from a 12-point lead to a 5-point lead. I thought was pretty, there's a lot of trust there in going for that. He made a throw to Drake London that I thought was on point. And obviously they had the flea flicker. I think he underthrew Matt Collins a little bit. But again, when you construct the team the way the Falcons do, you're not expecting Desmond Ridder to be the be-all, end-all quarterback. You just want him to drive the car. And I think even at the end, he drove the car pretty well. I think it was a very valiant effort, by the way. Let's talk about Green Bay for a sec. Yeah. No Bakhtiari, who apparently doesn't want to play on turf anymore. Christian Watson, Aaron Jones are two most explosive playmakers. I thought that given all of those things, Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur, at least in the first 3 quarters of the game, gave their team a shot. It was very unfortunate how it ended, though. You got to be able to pick up a yard on the road and to help yourself win a football game. And unfortunately, they were not able to.
I was disappointed. Okay, finish off with Atlanta for sure, because Ridder did go from 30-something passer rating. I know you don't adhere to the passer rating that much, but I mean, that first half was tough for him. To come back as they did, for the team to believe in him, that is really, really important for Atlanta. I texted a couple people in the organization, said that was a really important win. It's 2 games in. It's important because it continues to set the tone. Going into Detroit, they're going to be on fire there. They're going to be pissy after that loss.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a fun game next week. Back to Green Bay quickly. I was just disappointed with Jordan Love because I thought down the stretch they had it in their hands again. You got to move the ball down the field. I kept watching. I felt like they just weren't putting things together. I know they didn't have their main people. I get that, right? They didn't have their main employees, so to speak. But I don't know. I just felt like Green Bay had it and they let it slip away, and it was unfortunate. And my expectations are for a quarterback to step up. He's still feeling his way. I get it. Those are the games that he needs to march down the field and show the team that he is much better than just a middling quarterback, that he can be a top-tier quarterback for a top-tier team.
For sure. And you see it with other guys. You see it like yesterday with Mahomes. Again, that offense didn't have their best stuff, and he was able to make some plays down the stretch to sort of seal a victory. You see it all the time with guys like, Josh Allen and Justin Herbert. We'll talk about him in a little bit. That's a little weird, right? But you're right. I mean, I think at the quarterback position, you got to be able to rise above those things, and you got to make it so that you can't blame it on an AJ Dillon. You can't blame it on something like that, because ultimately it's all on your shoulders as the quarterback, which is interesting. Now, just briefly because we will talk about tonight, it was a huge win for the Falcons because Tampa Bay, I think surprisingly, is 2-0. The winner of tonight's game between Carolina and New Orleans will be New Orleans, if they win, will be 2-0. So you're in essence, because kind of everybody in that division has somewhat of an easier schedule, you have to win these games where you're favored to keep pace. And the Falcons did so. They go on the road next week to face a Detroit team. They're a few point underdogs to that team. Detroit coming off of, I think, a bad loss. I mean, Seattle without both of their tackles, right. Without, kind of getting banged up with Tariq Woolen at the end there. Really good effort by the Seattle Seahawks to come out of the road with a win, especially how they looked against the Rams. That's obviously the mark of a great coach, and Pete Carroll is a fantastic coach. I thought Geno Smith rebounded really well from what was a really bad first game. He played really well. He played awesome yesterday on the road in Detroit. And actually, Jared Goff did his part other than the interception. It was just a good game, and it was good for Seattle to get out of there. A lot of 1-1 teams now in the NFL, Thomas. What do you think about that when you think about, some of the teams that have been able to sneak out 2 wins, or some teams? I want to talk about the Chargers next year. The teams that have struggled out of the gate to do losses. It's not necessarily the end of the world when a lot of teams who look good in week 1 regressed in week 2, and vice versa.
Look, I'm raising my hand to stay on Detroit for a minute because you're jumping around. Not that you're jumping around and I can't follow, but I mean, just on Detroit. Jared Goff, I was impressed. I loved how he was moving around. He was moving around to his receiving core. I mean, continued to see them make legitimate plays. I think the fan base, of course, are believing in them. It was just tough. In the end, Seattle steps up and does what they need to do, to your point. It was great to see that. The Jared Goff interception, how many of those interceptions did I feel like we saw this weekend? This is really, really important. Well, and we will get to Baker Mayfield here in a minute because I want to raise my hand and give you some kudos on that as well. Detroit, though, again, that hopefully is not the beginning to Jared Goff starting to get rattled a little bit, because I was just really impressed with how he played the game up to his big mistake, of course.
Yeah, I think it was over 400 pass attempts between interceptions for Goff. And it wasn't even – it's kind of funny because I think we all give Jared Goff a little bit of flack as kind of a caretaker quarterback and kind of a middle-of-the-pack guy, which I think all of those things are true. But he was being aggressive down the football field and still avoiding those mistakes. But it just shows he made one mistake, and that game goes to overtime, and all of a sudden that team doesn't nearly have the slack that they think they have, right? When you go months on end without an interception, you have a margin of error that is realistic. And when you don't, the game gets a lot fairer for you, when you make those mistakes. And so I think that Lions will be fine. I think if you were to say going into it, you have Chiefs, Seahawks, 2 playoff teams last year in weeks 1 and 2, come out of that 1-1. I think most people would say that's an okay start for Detroit. Disappointing knowing how it happened, but ultimately not a terrible outcome. I think terrible outcomes would be the Chargers right now, who lost a very close game at the buzzer to the Miami Dolphins a week ago. A Dolphins team that I think is pretty impressive. I think Mike McDaniel, certainly knows what he's doing and is putting on a clinic of coaching and offense right now. But then they go to Tennessee, a team that, is, feeling their way, let's just say, with injuries and younger players kind of all around, especially on the offensive line where they don't have a lot of true talented players. The Chargers blow a lead. They have to claw back and force overtime before a field goal by the Titans puts them at 0-2. They go to Minnesota next week, another 0-2 team. Chargers on the road, probably in a must-win environment next week. I think it's going to get tense in Los Angeles, man. I mean, Staley has kind of been under the gun, a guy that I think some of the criticism of him is unfair. I think some of the praise of him early might have been a little bit premature. So he's by the media side on the hot seat, a better roster than 0-2. And I got to ask you, what do you think as far as their straights? Because this is a team that should be better than this, and it just gets harder for them.
Better roster for sure. I mean, defense is where they have to step up and be who they're supposed to be, right? I mean, that's going to be a really important thing. And back to Miami for a minute. You bring up Mike McDaniels, right? I couldn't let this go. Last night I'm listening to Chris Collinsworth. He literally put Mike McDaniels and Bill Belichick on the same wavelength as far as their ability and their mindset of teaching fundamentals. I could not believe that. So everyone jumps on the bandwagon here and there. And I like Mike. And yet it was funny because I was also watching Mike run across the field to shake hands. And I knew that was going to be a very cold interaction. And I could tell it even looked like Mike was nervous to come across and shake Bill's hands. Not nervous in the sense of, nerve wracking, but just like, here we go. I'm going to shake someone's hand who really doesn't want to shake my hand at all. And probably doesn't, think of me as a guy who's put the time in. But again, Chris Collinsworth, what do you think of that? How do you really take, I would say, one of the very best, if not the best in the history of this league? And by the way, I was listening to Mike Lombardi's new book, Football Done Right, and he lists the top 10 coach. Oh, talking about books, right? Is that what
by the way, this comes out tomorrow. If you order it today, you'll get it tomorrow.
Is anyone reading it for you?
I got a 5-star review. I have one for you in the mail, Thomas. I just had to come out. It's
is there a narrator? So. Is there a narrator? Do I have to actually?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I mean, it's more like you have to code along with it, right? So okay. It's not a great, When we write our book, Thomas, we'll be able to audible it so that scouts on the road can listen to it and all that kind of stuff.
Well, look, Mike Lombardi lists his top 10, although he was going down. He gets to Bill Belichick at 3. Do you know who number 2, and number 1 were?
Okay. Is Don Shula one of the top 2?
Not at all. It is Lombardi. Vince okay. Lombardi. Sorry, I was thinking Mike. Mike, by the way, is not related to Vince, but it was Vince Lombardi, and number 1 was Paul Brown, which I don't think that Bill Belichick would have an issue with that one bit. He might even have told Mike Lombardi, who, by the way, they're good friends, don't put me at the top of those 2 guys. It's almost heresy or sacrilegious. So look, the reality is I do think Bill Belichick is the best in modern history. And I think he could go toe to toe with those guys in a heartbeat in certain ways, of course. So that's how much I believe in Bill. And when people start talking about Bill going somewhere else, we don't need to get into that topic right now. The idea of him going somewhere else, I just don't think that there would be 10 plus teams waiting at his door to find out if he'd come on board with them. That's all.
Yeah, it's like when Andy Reid got fired by the Eagles right after going 4-12, and the Chiefs were like literally at his door the next day. And obviously the Chiefs have had nothing but winning seasons in the 11 years with Reid. I think the thing. So my opinion is Belichick's the best of all time. I put Don Shula up there a little bit because, like, did you Don Shula is something like 15 games over 500 in his career with a backup quarterback. So you like Earl Morrall, Scott Mitchell, guys like that. I think Don Shula obviously that's the record that Belichick is chasing right now as far as career wins. I think Belichick is a guy that evolves. Now, I do have a little bit of a concern sometimes with the 4th down, 2-point conversion stuff. I think he's maybe a little bit different than kind of what the math would say. But you watch last night's game and you look at how the Dolphins moved the ball or didn't move the ball versus how they move the ball against everybody else. And you can tell that Bill Belichick has such a massive influence over. And I think that's where Mike McDaniel's rushing over there because he knows. And here's the thing. 2 years ago, all the media could talk about was how brilliant Brandon Staley was. Hey, here they move coverages around. They got the Chiefs befuddled. They all this kind of stuff. And I think if Mike McDaniel's self-aware, and it seems like a really smart dude, he knows that it's going to take, he's probably even a bit bashful when they start talking about him in the same breath because he knows Belichick's not a genius because he shut down that Rams team in the Super Bowl in 2001. He's not a genius because he got 10-6 out of Matt Castle. He's not a genius for any one of the things he's done. He's a genius for that he's done it for 20-something years straight and had teams in the conference title game for a decade straight. Obviously, the 6 Super Bowls are amazing. And I think that every other coach needs to show that before we sort of get anywhere. And this brings up another point because I really want to hit on him on this point. Ryan makes a great one. The Dallas Cowboys so far are plus 60 in point differential. You and I talked about this on the show. Mike McCarthy is not regarded as one of the best coaches in the league by the media. In fact, I think by some of the sort of more hipster intelligentsia, he's considered people think he drags the Cowboys down. And I'm here to say, I could not reject that notion more. This Cowboys team is talented, don't get me wrong, but they're prepared. And they beat up on a Jets defense that made one of the best teams in the NFL last Monday look awful offensively. I like, to your point about Belichick and why, again, it's probably premature to call Mike McDaniel like the next coming. It's like, it takes a long time. You have to see the league's left hand and beat that after you've beaten the right hand before, right? And every time, like Belichick has done the 3-4 when no one was doing it. Then he did the Adalius Thomas stuff. I know you were there for that. He's beaten the league 18 different ways. If you can beat the league one way, that's awesome. But the league's not going to let you continue to beat it the way that you've beaten it the entire time. And Belichick's genius, and to a certain extent, Mike McCarthy's, are due to the fact that they're able to evolve and they're able to win under many different circumstances.
Let me interject here, if I may, and let me draw a parallel. In the academic realm and in mathematics, your expertise, how important is it for you to tap into the history of mathematics when you're working on anything? I would assume very, very important. Bill Belichick has such a grasp of history, right? All the way back to Annapolis through and through, right? His dad was there. He never graduated from Navy, but he has such a bond with all of that, right? All of in my mind, the very, very good coaches who are tried and true have an understanding of the history of the game. You can't just come in and wing it. I completely disagree. You can have some very smart guys who have a great opportunity to build. But I think to have a complete coach, you have to understand the history of the game. And I'm not saying hang out there in the 60s and 70s, but to be able to develop certain things, I think it's really important to understand where it comes from, the nuances of it, and as it's evolved, being able to get creative with your scheme. I think Bill does a great job.
100%. I think the best mathematicians are the ones that understand. I mean, the biggest thing is anytime you're trying to break ground in any field, and we run into this at Sumer, right? Because we're trying to do things a little differently, right? We're trying to approach the game differently. If you don't have a good understanding of how things have been done before, and there's value in contrarianism. There 100% is. There's value in thinking differently. But the only way that you understand the context of your contrarianism is if you understand fully the existing status quo and those that have come before it and where those evolutions came from. And so in math, it's tough. Like in math, it's so funny because you have like, when you would mentor students, they come, you'd be like, hey, I learned this. And it's like, well, you got to go back to this paper. Somebody actually did it. They just called it something different. Or, you have to understand in the context of what you're doing, why what you've done is not quite that novel and why you need to like be even more innovative to break real ground. And I think the same thing, I mean, anytime, and we rarely clash on things, but I would say like anytime like an idea of mine rubs you the wrong way, it's always because it doesn't properly take into context the history, right? And how that happens. And also one of the reasons we get along so well is I because I'm a sicko, I know sort of the history of this league fairly well. And so when I try to like couch my my findings and stuff, I try to relate it back to things somebody like you has experienced before, because I get that it would actually hit home better if you're not seeing it as foreign, right? If it's just a spin-off of something that you've already actually experienced, you're going to relate to it so much more, better. So,
and if I could come back to all of that said, come back to Mike McCarthy, when you're talking about Dallas, right? That's a good football team. We know that. I mean, they're thriving in a lot of different areas. We know how important Dan Quinn is to that team. I think Mike is a very good football coach. I still look back sometimes and I'm so surprised that he's no longer in Green Bay, but that happens, of course. There's reasons. I know he was down and out over that. That wasn't easy for him. He's where he is right now. I know there have been some ups and downs there, but he is a really good all-in-all football coach. Has one of the best D coordinators in the history of the game in my mind. Again, I know there's a little bit of homer there because I have such appreciation for what Dan Quinn can do defensively and what he can do as a leader, as the next tier leader on that team, which I still think he's primed to be the next big time head coach in our league. I really do believe. Look at how he's ripping things up. It allows that offense in certain ways to do what they're doing. I know that might seem counterintuitive, but I mean, everything that defense brings to the table, the passion, all of the elements of what that team is, man, it just has that offense thriving like crazy. I'm watching CD doing his thing. I'm watching Zach. I mean, the runners.
Tony
Pollard, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I love watching them because I think they're popping it. They're just aggressive. They're smoking people. I think they're really, really throwing themselves around in a good, positive way. And if you do get a chance and look into who I recommended might be there towards the end of the season on our little Sumer poll, get back to me and let me know what you saw.
Yeah. No, I mean, you had some really good insights last year as well on certain players. I'm not going to give that away, but who would blow up. I mean, it's the concerns I have about Dallas have nothing to do with their front. Like one of the issues is that Dak is injury prone, and not necessarily injury prone that he'll get hurt and miss time, but when Dak gets injured, it's just it's kind of like he's somewhat limited physically. And so when he gets hurt, it hurts him more than maybe somebody like Herbert or somebody like that. Mm-hmm. So hopefully he can stay healthy. Cause I think if he's healthy, like, look, when we do our power ratings, I'm waiting for those to be adjusted. I think Kansas City numerically will still be the number one team in our power rankings. But if I were doing power rankings just based upon what I've seen the first 2 weeks, Dallas is the best team in the NFL right now. And it's I think a testament to everybody in that building, and it shows a lot of strength too. They hired John Park and everybody in that front office to add to that an analytical element to it. Not that they didn't before, of course, but I think that they built their team out pretty strongly. So right? I'm so happy to see where they are.
Eric, a complete team. That's why you're watching it. It just feels it feels
Mhm.
complete. And by the way, I
Yeah.
just got texted, this is not beer. This is kombucha. So I don't want people thinking I'm drinking beer on the Sumer.
You and Michael Floyd might fail a drug test over kombucha if you remember that story.
Yeah.
Okay, the last one, I do want to talk Tampa Bay. Here's a couple things I think we missed on Tampa Bay. Okay. Todd Bowles took over that head coach job. Okay, let's back up even further. The weekend of the conference title games last year, Tom Brady retires.
Mm-hmm.
Then a month later, he unretires. Then a month from that, Bruce Arians retires or moves into a different role, and Todd Bowles is the head coach. I think we all realize that Todd Bowles in New York didn't have the best of luck. He got, the Geno Smith injury. He had, some of his players got old quick, and Todd Bowles didn't get a great shake. Todd Bowles had a brilliant performance in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. I think we all had high expectations for him last year as the Bucs head coach. They win the division, but it's a little off. They lose Brady. They come into the season with $75 million in dead money. They're starting Baker Mayfield at quarterback. The betting markets say they're a 6.5 win team. Now they're 2-0. I think people expected them to win yesterday, but no one expected them to win against Minnesota. Todd Bowles having a normal offseason as the head coach, I think, was underrated part of this. And I think that Todd Bowles is a better football coach than the market baked in there. I think Shaq Barrett. I think that the two linebackers they had, Levante David and Devin White, the corners, the safeties. It's a good defense. And Baker Mayfield has simply not made the kind of boneheaded mistakes yet that hurt him when he was in Cleveland, Carolina, and LA. I don't know how long it lasts for them because, like you said, like $75 million in dead money, they don't have great roster depth. But as long as they're not injured, I think this team is actually going to be fairly feisty. And I've earned a little bit more respect for Mayfield and Bowles than I think I had at the beginning of the year. And I can now see why. I can see why they're 2-0. And I do want to give them a pat on the back because I'm pretty impressed with where they are.
Obviously coming into the season with lower expectations and people scoffing at the Mayfield decision with Jason Light's decision to go in that direction. It's fun watching him. I mean, look, I'm raising my hand, like I said to you earlier. You've been behind him. I think being within an organization in Tampa in that situation, saying, screw everyone out there who is being negative about him and the organization, and let's just let it go. That's what I feel like they're playing like, right? How many times did he hit Evans? I'm just trying to think. Like, I felt like he was on the dial, right? Just Baker had a swagger about him yesterday. And like you said, how long does it go? But they're in a division that they can survive in that division and they can thrive in that division, right? That's not the division back in the day where you had 4 legit quarterbacks popping it all the way through, right? So they could take it home before you know it. They're sitting at the top, battling for the top of it. That's
right. You think about your Super Bowl year, even the year after, where you guys, of course, were Super Bowl contenders, and you had New Orleans as a Super Bowl contender with a great offense. Yeah. And even when they had those 7 and 9 years, they had a great offense, so they could beat you at any game. Then you had Carolina, who was feisty with Cam Newton, and then Tampa Bay had Jameis, and that was like they could do. Those Jameis Bucks could beat anybody or lose to anybody. Right. Now that division's a little bit more contained, where they're all kind of the same. And and that NFC, look, Minnesota was a 13-win team last year. Now they're 0-2. Everybody in the NFC North is 1-1 or worse. The NFC West, the Niners are a house, but we don't know what the Rams are doing necessarily. Are they rebuilding? They've been competitive for 2 straight games. Seattle's was very good yesterday. The Cardinals are rebuilding, but then the NFC East, it's like the Giants were losing by 3 touchdowns to the Cardinals yesterday. And the last team I do want to talk about. So let's move on for Tampa Bay briefly before we preview tonight. I know I'm all over the place. Eric Bieniemy coached his ass off yesterday.
Yes.
I was so impressed. So full disclosure, like we have models at Sumer and I'm kind of like documenting how they're doing and everything internally. And one of the biggest discrepancies between us and the market yesterday was Washington against Denver. Nothing against Denver. But I thought Washington was much more underrated. They have a great defensive line. They have good defensive backs, great weapons, an okay offensive line. And it looks like Sam Howell is getting something. They're getting something out of him from Eric Bieniemy. He was fantastic yesterday, and they got behind 21-3. They fought back. They hung on to the lead at the end. It was kind of a fluky Hail Mary, and then they held on with the 2-point conversion. But I think that whoever hires Eric Bieniemy next year as the head coach, because I think if it continues, it's a no-brainer. Like, you can't pass this guy over twice now, right? If he continues to coach this way with a guy who's not Patrick Mahomes, it's going to be a slam dunk. And goodness gracious, they moved the football yesterday on a Denver defense that isn't bad at all.
So let's backtrack there for a half a second. You said pass him over twice. I mean, this guy has been passed over 8 to 10 times, right? I know what you're saying. I'm being a little facetious about it. Like, look, if that happens, if he thrives with his team, with a guy like Sam Howell, who's doing a damn good job, as you mentioned, for a guy who's been, perceived as being lower than the middle. I mean, I think he was coming out in the early recommendations or the early projections as maybe the bottom 2 or 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the league, right? So he's got a little edge, just like Baker does in a different way. Some of these other guys do. Like, wait a minute, I'm going to come and I'm going to play. I'm going to be the competitor that I am. I'm going to run when I need to run, and believe me, he will run. I'm going to pass the damn ball with alacrity, and I like that because that's what he does sometimes. There's something about him that's impressive. I'll raise my hand. I was on a radio show, another hand raise. I'm raising my hand left, right, and center today to say kudos to him, because I just did not know how they were going to be functioning with someone like Sam, who I wasn't sure where he was. Now, look, everyone thinks I was just at Chapel Hill this weekend. I mean, that fan base there loves him. They loved him, right? They bring in Drake May to come in to, be the next, the incumbent or whatever. And they still talk about Sam Howell there, right? They have such fond opinions of what he can do.
Yeah, there's a study I kind of want to do, and I think some people have done this in various ways, but when a quarterback does really well early in his college career and then loses a lot of support and then struggles later, relatively speaking, I still want that over, and I'm not trying to drag Desmond Ridder, but like Desmond Ridder started out kind of poorly and got better, right? And when your best seasons are when you're older in college, I think that it's a little bit more of a red flag because you're physically more gifted than some of the other players. You're kind of in your physical prime. Whereas a guy like Howell, if you looked at the betting markets 2 years ago, he was the favorite to be the number 1 overall pick for moments in time. And then he just struggled his final year in North Carolina. You took away Javonte Williams. You took away the guy that Diami Brown, who's now playing with him in Washington. You took away Michael Carter. And all of a sudden it's not as easy. I'm like, yeah, but he did produce back then, like same thing. Justin Herbert, Jordan Love were also guys who produced better earlier in the Brock Purdy, if you turned his college career upside down, it would make more sense. He was better early at Iowa State than he was at the end. So I think that's again, a testament to Eric Bieniemy. When I said twice, I mean, like, I'm saying when you pop up once, that's kind of your one shot, and then it kind of dissipates. He's popping up again, and I hope he obviously can capitalize on it.
And all of that said, and all of our lauding, it's still only the second game. Yep. And believe me, I say this all the time. We have some unbelievably smart and creative defensive coordinators out there. I texted Dan and I said, Dan, what, do you think you could do with 2, 3, or 4 of these guys, these quarterbacks that, that you haven't played and you're not going to be playing this year? I mean, those veteran D coordinators love that opportunity to run roughshod over some of those kids. And when they thrive, it's pretty impressive when they can thrive. What I'm saying is we'll see. We'll see with Ridder, we'll see in Pittsburgh. We'll see in a number of different places. I mean, look, I'm sitting there. We're not getting even a chance to get over to Indianapolis. I mean, that cat scores 2 touchdowns, concusses. What's that mean? That's a whole other thing. Can he do amazing things? Yes. But you have to be smart, right? We as an organization have to be smart about how you utilize. Or do you just get every win? I mean, Chris Ballard is a very smart football man, as is the new head coach. They understand that. But how much can they put, how much can they put a quarterback like that, on the block? And what can you do to protect him?
Yeah, you saw this in your own division where Cam Newton, when everything went well, that's a 15-win Super Bowl team. But you can't, when the whole airplane is built out of you, you can't get hurt, right? And Cam, ultimately failed the Panthers at the end, not because he wasn't good enough, but because he was broken up as a player. Physically, it just couldn't work. And I fear that for Anthony Richardson, because the whole airplane is going to be built out of him, and you can't get injured. Now, good on Gardner Minshew coming in, and good on Steichen coming in and getting them that win. That was super important. To your point about Washington and how it's just 2 weeks, it gets a lot harder. This week, they're 7-point home underdogs to Buffalo. It gets a little bit fairer than it was the first 2 weeks against two teams that have yet to win a game. So it's a good point. I want to talk about tonight briefly. I want to first, though, give a little bit of love to our folks that are running the Sumer Sports Twitter account. Thomas, I'm going to put this up on the board here. This is our preview of tonight's game between the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers. We give Cleveland about a 55% chance to win, which means we give the Steelers about a 44% chance to win. If you want any of these things, if you want any of these previews, if you want any of these reviews, go to sumersports.com/subscribe and subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to our great content, because we're doing great things. And honestly, our favorite thing about this is it helps our favorite GM, Thomas Dimitroff, prep for this show, because now we have a place where Thomas can go and look at stats and look at all these things so that he can talk the same language that I get to talk. And honestly, it's easier for me too. So I don't have to, when I make the show notes, I can just copy and paste off of our newsletter. So we really appreciate all of you that have signed up. We've got we've increased our signups by hundreds over the past few days. Really appreciate that. This is a game where I'm really interested, Thomas, because Cleveland was really impressive at home in the elements against Cincinnati. Pittsburgh was the opposite of that at home against the San Francisco 49ers. Now you get another week's worth of data in, and Cincinnati appears not to be that team that's gone to 2 straight AFC title games. Burrow's injured. Do we need to maybe grade that Cleveland win on a curve? And furthermore, the San Francisco 49ers, again, in a win on the road against Los Angeles, showed that they're one of the best teams in football. Do we need to maybe give Pittsburgh a little bit of slack after getting blown out in week 1 by them? I'm intrigued by this game.
This game is interesting. I think it comes down to, okay, first of all, let's talk Kenny Pickett. I'm going to throw it over to you back for 10 seconds. Do you think he's better than Desmond Ridder?
I think yes.
Okay. Do you think he can carry the Pittsburgh Steelers into the next wave?
No.
No. You don't think
I think he's got to be a driver of the car. I don't think he can be the car.
Okay. Will he save Mike Tomlin in the sense of, I'm not saying Mike's on his way out. I'm just saying he is a really good football coach, but there's all this banter out there about what this team can do. And I'm curious. You think he's solid? You think he's a 5?
Yeah, I think if you build a good team around him, you could win, and I think you could win a Super Bowl with him. I think though that once if he were to have success like that, and he started making Burrow money, I think you'd start to see the results decline because you can't build the rest of the team. I think he's kind of in that tier. I think he's more in the Cousins, Goff, Mayfield, and that's a wide tier. But I don't think he's like Matt Ryan. I don't think he's like Matt Ryan or better, right? I don't think he's like that. I think he's talented enough to be good enough to win with, though.
You think he's right in the mid-pack or eventually will be mid-pack? Look, whether people argued whether Matt was 7, 8, 9, and not 5, 4, 3, you can win with good quarterbacks in my mind. I just do not believe in today's NFL you can win with, again, semantics here, with adequate. So somewhere along the way, that adequate quarterback, whoever that may be, I'm not even talking about Kenny. Kenny's young. If they dabble over in the good area when they need to be good, then Super Bowl is in their plans. If you're always adequate and you can't pull out the big plays when you need the big plays, and you're not consistent with it, and you're consistently adequate or mediocre or satisfactory, that's a tough thing to take it home. You have to have a lot around you, of course. So let me just say this quickly, because I do want you to comment on this from a statistical standpoint. you have a run game here. You have two really good running backs. I mean, this run game on both sides, right? What did Najee? What was he coming into the game? These two guys, I think it's going to be a really cool run game. I think they're going to be dictating what's going on in this game. Can you talk about that from an analyst?
I don't think there's a better runner in the entire NFL than Nick Chubb. Like if you just take running the ball, I think Nick Chubb's as good as anybody. Harris last week, efficiency-wise, was fine, 5.2 yards per carry. They just got behind so quickly that he only got 6 carries. He got 2 catches. He's a guy that, Harris is kind of, check me on this if I'm stupid, but he kind of reminds me of Eddie George, where it's not explosive, right? Eddie George was never explosive, but I don't have a problem giving him 300 carries. I know he's durable. I know he's tough. I know he's going to pick up the blitz. I know he's going to be that guy. So I think a lot of people in the fantasy football communities don't like Najee Harris because he's kind of meh from an efficiency standpoint, but they can give him the ball a lot. So I like this. Nick Chubb's kind of the, again, efficiency-wise, Nick Chubb is kind of like the Barry Sanders-ish kind of guy in this realm, in that he's always averaging 5 yards a carry. Now, Barry was his own guy, different, but efficiency-wise, whereas Najee Harris is more of that Eddie George type, where it's 4 yards a carry, kind of grinding it out, can win with you, catches the ball in the backfield, super, super well-rounded guy. And yeah, I think the contrast would be awesome tonight.
These running backs are how they're going to affect the respective quarterback leading their teams. I just think it's going to be really interesting. I mean, where is Deshaun Watson right now, right? Nick Chubb comes in and rocks the world tonight, and Deshaun's, feeling good and getting into a groove. I think that's going to be really important. I think if they both come to the table, I don't think Najee's going to be a 100-yarder this game, but maybe Nick is, Chubb is. Then we see how they operate. And I think if both quarterbacks are given legit runners in their attack tonight, we know personally it's probably got to go to Deshaun Watson. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, Watson struggled, but I'm willing to give him a mulligan off the weather last week. The one thing that I think will be interesting is Amari Cooper is out tonight in all likelihood. That means that the best receivers for Cleveland are Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and David Njoku. That's not what Deshaun Watson's used to, and having Hopkins and Will Fuller and guys like that in his past. So that it's a big test for Deshaun Watson, especially considering they come at you with TJ Watt. Cam Hayward, that's a loss for Pittsburgh, which hurts. Alex Highsmith's the guy that got a contract. He's a good complementary edge player. So it's a great matchup. I'm looking forward to this game much more, and no offense to the teams that are playing in the other game, but I'm looking forward to that game a little bit more than I'm looking forward to New Orleans, Carolina, just because I think New Orleans and Carolina it's going to be much more of a slugfest. I think both teams, Carolina's going to fight like hell not to become the only 0-2 team in that division. Derek Carr was aggressive last week against Tennessee, but it didn't translate to a lot of points. They were probably lucky to come out of that game with a win against the Titans. I need to see more out of both teams, frankly, in this game. I'm looking forward to the team that steps up in this one.
Well, I would just say, and I know I love this, looking forward to this game as well, the Saints-Carolina game. You don't think that's a pressure-packed game for the Panthers? They have a quarterback. All the other quarterbacks are kind of doing their thing, right? C.J. Stroud I'm sure you got a chance to watch a little bit of the highlights. He was stroking some things. The guys have been doing some interesting stuff, right? Whatever, the first, second, third year guys. There's a lot of pressure on this team. And if he comes in and they keep rocking around with him a little bit, I really hope that Carolina comes in here and he has a really good game. I think it'll be good for the organization. It'll be good for Scott Fitter and everyone to kind of take a deep breath coming into a really, really important division game, to what you were saying earlier. That's it.
Yeah, I hope they get DJ Chark back. It was tough for them, but yeah, I know we got to run here. We really appreciate all of you coming. This is another one of those streams where we've had a record high number of people watching, both on Twitter and on here. So we really appreciate you guys coming. We'll be back on Wednesday. We'll be longer this week than we were last week. It was a little bit of an abbreviated podcast for us on Wednesday, but we really appreciate you guys coming. We have more podcasts this week from Sean and Tage, as well as one from Parker. So you're going to get your fix at Sumer Sports. Thomas, do you have any parting words?
No, I just would love to have everyone be. We have a big group here today. Let us know what you want. What are you looking for? What insight are you looking for? We know what we got to get from Eric. We want unbelievable intelligence is what we want. Let's talk about it. Let us give you what you want. I hope you're getting the right dialogue, but share with us. Appreciate you.
Yeah, for sure. We love feedback, and we've been able to take that feedback in the past and incorporate it. But yeah, this is you guys' show. We love our audience. Tell somebody about this show. Let's double the audience by next time. So that we can continue to give the people what they want and cover this league the only way Sumer can, and only Sumer can. So for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 103 of the Sumer Sports Show.